Well, welcome back everyone. So last time you watched me do this inlay, and just about the only thing left to do now on this neck is actually fret the thing. I was going to actually leave the fretting till a little bit later on because I was quite keen to get back to the body and get it prepared to receive the neck. But I thought while I had the tools to hand, having just taken delivery of what, just by pure coincidence, happens to be all Costco, happens to be all Hosco, everything. Yeah, I thought I might as well just crack on and get it done, really. Since you last saw me work on the neck, there was one just little thing I did, which was to file off the end of the fretboard here and just put a little semicircle in there. That's just because the binding that I put on the end of the fretboard wasn't actually up to the full height of the fretboard. So just putting that little carve in there made it look very nice and brought it all flush. Now, thinking back to when I first did this neck, which is quite a long time ago now, I did originally bind it, and I intended to actually insert the frets inside the binding, which would involve clipping the fret tangs and actually fitting them, as I say, inside the binding. To be quite honest with you though, because I encountered some problems where I just frankly hadn't been accurate enough cutting my fret slots by hand, I then ended up having to redo several of the fret slots. And because of that, I had to cut through the binding. Well, I didn't have to cut through the binding, but it was a lot easier to do that. As such, I'm faced with a choice. I could put some of the frets inside the binding and put others in as you normally would. I could mask that to some extent by still clipping the fret tangs and then filling in the little gaps with dust and glue, and it would look okay. But it is a lot of extra work for something that I think would end up looking just a little bit patchy. The other option is to recut all of the fret slots, as I'm about to do, and still, as I say, nip the fret tangs and fill them in with a little bit of dust and glue and kind of create a faux binding effect. You would still, if you looked at the edges of the fretboard, see little dark patches where all the frets are, but it would actually probably look pretty tidy. But to be quite honest with you, I really am in the mode where I just want to get things done in the quickest way possible now. So I'm just going to saw the frets out as you normally would do, and I am just going to put them right to the edge so that you will see the ends of the frets. It's not very fashionable at the moment, but it is the way that guitars have been done, at least unbound guitars have been done, for a very, very long time. What I really want to try and focus on is to try and make sure that the fret slots are the right depth so that there isn't too much of a gap behind the tang, because then you can actually get some sort of unsightly cavities below the fret tangs, which I then would have to fill with dust and glue. It's my first time doing it. I might end up having to do that. To be quite honest with you, my Gibson Les Paul Studio, which is an alright guitar, that has those kind of unsightly cavities up the fretboard, so I wouldn't be too disappointed with myself if I did end up with a few of those, but hey ho. So, before we can start doing the fretting, we need to actually cut the fret slots, because they've now been filled several times with super glue and all kinds of inlay material, and the inlay material itself, or at least the plastic stuff, hasn't actually been sawed through before. So, on with the fret saw. I have actually cut fret slots before, but I don't have a guide, so I'm just using a piece of masking tape to give me a rough guide as to how deep my fret slots should be, based off how deep they look they should be when I push the fret wire, or the tang of the fret wire, up against the edge of the saw. Let's see how that goes. taking the advice of Mr. Crow, I'm just going to take my little triangular file and just bevel the edges of the fret slots a tiny bit, concentrating more so on the inner region rather than the outside edges. One, to help guide the fret in, but also just in the hope that should I need to pull a fret, or if anyone needs to pull a fret in the future, it might just reduce the chances of pulling ebony out, but also that inlay. So I'd like to offer you some sage advice at this point, but this is the first time I'm doing this job, and if I'm quite honest with you, I maybe haven't researched it as well as I should have done. I have seen all the how-tos on how to do it before, but it was quite a while ago. But just to try and make life a little bit easier, I am using pre-cut fret wire in this instance. To be specific, it's Hosco nickel silver, which I don't even really have a preference towards jumbo fret wire, but in this instance it's probably going to be the best for making sure that I actually cover up the gaps in my inlay. I've got some standard wood glue in a little applicator that I'm hoping is actually going to be able to push some glue out. It might be a little bit too fine. If it is, we will just have to use a bit more messier method, but I think that is actually going to work. Wish me luck, everybody. Again, just by sheer chance, I've got a Hosco fret setter and I'm just going to go for it. I think this is trying to tell me that my wire's not radiused enough. Uh-oh. Or there's a hump in the middle of my fretboard, one of the two. Nope, just have to hit it a bit harder apparently. Fair enough. Well, that's good. It means I'm getting good adhesion on the tangs. Maybe overdoing it there a little bit, but I really want to do a good job of this. Just running my fingernail down the side to make sure it really is pressed right up against the fretboard. And it is. I think I'm going to try 2 or 3 of these, and we shall try cutting the ends. Okay, I've encountered my first one that's not staying down of its own accord. It's nearly there, but it's not staying. I'm going to have to try clamping it down and seeing if it takes with the glue. So I now have the fret wire in the neck, but depending on the edit you've just seen, I might have a little bit of explaining to do because some things might not be too clear. I began trying to place the frets using my fret setter and a little panel pin hammer, which actually worked really well. Can't complain about that. And as you know, I had a little bit of glue in there just to try and fill the fret slots. Now I got the first 2 frets in absolutely perfect, snipped them off with my fret cutters, absolutely no problem there either. Got to the 3rd fret and I found I had a fret where the ends were springing up. And one thing we do to try and avoid this is to actually sort of hammer in the ends first and then the middle. But no matter what I did with this, the fret ends just did not want to stay in the slot. And I really don't think that I cut the slot too loose. I think what it boils down to is the radius on the fret wire. Now anyone who's thinking about fretting a guitar for the first time, pay attention here because I've learned a lesson. Just because you're buying pre-cut fret wire doesn't mean that you're going to get away without bending the fret wire. It does come with a radius on it, and actually the radius that it came with I think was ever so slightly tighter than the fretboard I'm using. But it turns out, in my case at least, that wasn't quite enough. I actually initially packed the slot with glue and decided to clamp the fret down, which probably would have worked. And then I went to the other end of the neck and started working my way along from there. And again, I got 3 frets in before I hit a one which didn't want to stick down. I was going to clamp that end down too and just sort of leave it for the night and then resume the next day. But then I sort of realised it might be the radius of the fret wire that was the problem, so I decided to test that. I actually went back to this end and I pulled the problem fret, and I effectively just used the back side of my fret thingy. I just basically used the back side of that against the bench to try and increase, or well actually decrease, the radius of the fret wire that I was putting in to make the curve tighter basically. And I actually did it pretty much to the extreme. And that worked perfectly. Hammered it in at the end as I always do, and then in the middle, you know, made sure it was all seated right, and it was absolutely fine. I then proceeded to do the other one. That one was fine too, and I basically did that for the entire neck from there on in. I made sure that every fret had an extra little bend to it, and they all seemed to be sitting fine. I left it overnight, no clamping, came back the following day with a fresh set of eyes, had a good look at it, and realised there were a couple of frets which maybe weren't quite sat all the way in. So I gave them a little tap, left them another 24 hours to make sure they didn't spring back up, and they seem absolutely fine. Hopefully you can see, looking over the fretboard there, the actual shape of this fret wire seems a little bit unusual to me, in that normally you would expect a cross profile of a piece of fret wire to look very much like a sort of flat bottomed mushroom. This wire looks very much sort of oval shaped from the side, so when you do look down the fretboard you can sort of see a shadow under the fret wire, which almost makes it look like it's not been seated properly, but I assure you it definitely is. So that was my initial journey with installing fret wire, and it wasn't really as bad as I thought. I can see how people can get very frustrated with a piece that won't stick down, but thankfully my problems were easily remedied. So what I won't be doing today is actually leveling and crowning the frets, because I like to leave that as, or I would like to leave that as the last job to be done. It's something I feel should be done on a fully assembled guitar that's had time to sit. What I will be doing is filing back and neatening up the ends of these. So I believe you can pretty much do this with any file going, but I decided to buy myself a block with a file embedded in it. That gives me a flat surface that I can just run up the edge and file the frets back until they're married with the wood, and then once they are, I can use the beveled side, run that up and down, and that will put the angle in the edges of the frets. If you are doing it freehand, I believe one of the biggest mistakes people can make is to bring that bevel over too much, so that the point where the string's going to be making contact is beveled. You don't want that. If in doubt, go with the steeper bevel. So I'm just going to set out with the flat surface of my filing block resting on the frets, and go up and down until I'm making contact with the wood on the fretboard. I'm not very squeamish about it touching the wood or even shaving the wood slightly, because at the end of the day I am going to be rolling the edges on the fretboard, and this will help. Wow, that's not taking very long at all. I think that's pretty much there. Now going over it again, but just letting the flat edge rock over slightly to the other side of the fretboard. Same on the other side. Now the beveled edge. It's funny how the presence of frets can make a neck feel a little bit thicker than it did without them. Although we're not crowning today, I've got this, again Hosco, but it doesn't have to be Hosco. I've got this kind of crowning tool, which I'm just actually going to run over the corners in a bid to just sort of round them a little bit more. that really has made all of the difference. I know it's not sort of fully crowned and polished yet, but just actually taking those corners off the edge, it all already feels like a finished neck. So that's great. The only thing left to do in terms of getting this fret wire in is we do still have a couple of fret slots where my slot is a little bit deeper than the tang of the fret. So we just need to fill those holes in with, guess what? Yep, dust and glue. And then we will be done for the day. Nice short video. There we have it. I've just given the neck a final sort of going over with some 120 grit just to make sure everything was nice and smooth, and it feels really nice. Obviously it's all going to get a final going over before finishing anyway, but it's already feeling nice and playable as it is there. So there you go, quite a short video from me this time. There is of course still things to do on the neck. We need to fit the tuners, there is the nut to do, and of course once I've got the neck fit to the body as well, there is still the final fret leveling and crowning and everything to do as well. But that is certainly the main portion of it done. Speaking of the body, it will probably be making an appearance next time. Those who've been following my channel for a while know that I've already well done most of the body. It's just rough carved at the moment, but it's getting there. If you haven't seen it, by all means go back and watch some of my older slightly cringe-worthy videos. Note that I have already actually routed the first pass of the neck pocket, which was nice and good and fine and tight and everything, and then as usual I've done things out of the wrong order, and after I gave my neck a little bit of a sand a while ago, it obviously took the width of the neck down ever so slightly, and now it's not such a good fit. It's sort of borderline as to whether clamping would do it, or it might need a veneer in there or something as well. So next time we're probably going to try and sort that out and finish routing the neck pocket before going on to do the pickup cavities and everything else. If that sounds like something you'd enjoy, please do subscribe. The channel does seem to have stalled a little bit recently in that I'm not really able to share my videos around on places like Facebook without them actively being suppressed by the algorithms on Facebook. I wonder why that is. Possibly something to do with the fact that they now do video as well. So yeah, if you do know anyone who would enjoy the channel, please do share it around, because I think that's the only way we're going to build up a bit of a community around this. But yeah, have a good one, and I'll see you next time.